So many people don't think about how they're going to communicate when they leave their home country. Every time I mention this in any sort of pre-travel briefing with my current staff that I work with, most people say they didn't even think about it before they decided to plan this particular trip. It's always critical to make sure that you have a way to reach loved ones back home and then any individuals you may be traveling with as well. So let's chat about the best phone plans and communication methods for international travel. My name is Evan, and I'm a travel risk manager for a global organization that sends travelers all over the world. And we're going to talk about international phone plans and what are some of the best options for you when you're traveling abroad. Before we begin, I just want to have a brief little interjection to say that this is no way any sort of advertisement for any of the companies that I'm going to speak about today. All of the opinions in this particular piece are my own. And I'm not advocating that you pick any of these particular companies either. It's just to give a general example of what are some of the best options for you. The first option we're going to talk about is roaming plans that go through your regular mobile carrier that you have currently. So most mobile carriers, whether it be in the US, Europe, Canada, Australia, basically any country in the globe, will have some kind of international roaming plan available for their customers. In the US, I can give a couple examples, one of which I've used. So AT&T and also Verizon offer an international roaming day pass that costs about $10 a day, and it gives you access to your traditional texting, calling, and then also a limited amount of high-speed data. So that's limited to around half a gig a day, and then after that, they throttle your data speed from there. I've used Verizon personally on several different trips previously, as well as when I've lived abroad for shorter periods of time. I found that it was fairly adequate for all of my needs. However, the data issue became more and more apparent just because I like to stream music a lot. So I would say, depending on how much you use your data, you just want to be cautious about this particular plan. And it's usually better used if you're going to be in a location for a shorter period of time. T-Mobile also offers a similar day pass system that can be bought on a per day basis or for a longer period of time. So an example of that could be 1 month, and I think there's some intervals in between as well. You can check out their website and see what those options are. The benefits of using one of these options would be that you're already a customer. So once you activate the international roaming portion of this, then you don't have to worry about creating an eSIM on your phone. You don't have to worry about having a different number for your travel. And then in addition, there's really no steps except for turning your phone on once you arrive in that particular country you're going to for your trip. The other thing to mention on this is that the roaming plans tend to cost significantly more through your traditional carrier than some of the other options we're going to talk about. And then, like I mentioned before, they do limit that high-speed data to a small amount per day, which could be problematic depending on your data usage. The next service I'm going to talk about is Google Fi. So Google Fi is one of these really popular options, especially for people coming from the US. It provides unlimited texting, calling, and high-speed data for 200 plus countries around the globe. It can work in the US and does run off from T-Mobile network. So there are some people who just keep Google Fi as their traditional network, and then it completely network switches the moment you jump off the plane and turn your phone back on. The pricing is relatively affordable compared to some of the other plans that I mentioned. So the unlimited plan that I retain for my international travel costs $65 a month, and that includes every unlimited part of that. So international data, calling and texting, all unlimited at $65 USD a month. One advantage is that you can actually pause this service for 3 months at a time. So what I personally do is I have an even cheaper phone plan here in the United States. When I decide to travel, I turn on Google Fi before I leave. Once I arrive in country, I turn off my other mobile network and have Google Fi for those days that I'll be abroad. And then, I press pause once I've arrived back in the US, and they'll prorate any of those costs for you within the app and bill you for whatever you owe out of that $65 within that time frame. So it's not actually going to cost you $65 a month if you decide to turn it on and off like I do. If you don't unpause it within 3 months, it will automatically do so, but then you're allowed to just pause it again for 3 months. So I think it's relatively easy to do that. Google Fi is technically optimized for Android and more specifically Google products, as you can imagine, but they've made a lot of strides to improve the way it interacts with iPhone users. So really the only limitation currently for someone who may use an iPhone like I do is that network switching is not available through Google Fi at this point. So that really comes into play when they may work off from two different networks in a particular country. And in that case, you wouldn't be able to switch from network to network depending on how good the coverage is in a particular location. Google Fi does require a physical SIM card or an eSIM. If you plan to use it as your regular network every day, obviously you're not going to have to add an eSIM to your phone every time. For me, I have two different eSIMs, one for my local phone here in the US, and then also one for my SIM card for Google Fi as well. The one thing to note on this is that I do have a different number for Google Fi as a result of the fact that my long-term number is with my local service here in the US as well. Overall, I would definitely recommend this service. If you're from the US and you think you need to have some kind of international coverage while you're abroad, I think this is one of the best options for you, and switching back and forth between an even cheaper plan in the United States is always a good option to keep the affordability relatively in check. Now we're going to talk about some other eSIM options. So I'll name a couple companies that you may have heard of before, some of which pop up periodically as advertisements on YouTube, for example. So Airalo, that's a really popular one. Saely, AirHub, and there's a series of others. 15 to 20 of them that are all eSIM international plans. They're relatively common at this point, as you can imagine, with that many different carriers, and they're pretty easy to use too. So all of these companies offer cheap alternatives to some kind of typical phone plan that you would use in a particular location. Some of these plans will offer texting or calling depending on the location, but they mostly work off from data roaming. And so you'll find that that's the biggest offering that all of them have. So if you do need texting or calling, you may have to look at some different options or sort of cycle through these different companies to see which ones might offer data and calling in a particular location. Oftentimes a region, there'll be better services within a particular region versus others, so you can check depending on that particular company. It's important to research each of these companies and just, depending on that destination that you may be going to, they may charge more or less, and that depends on the agreement that they have with local carriers. So keep in mind that you definitely want to research a lot before you pick one out. And it's going to be location specific. So, whatever country you plan on going to, you want to make sure that this particular company works in that country. Most of these services will have some kind of app that allows you to tailor your data needs for that particular location. And oftentimes they'll sell you data sort of on a one-time basis. So you could buy 50 gigs, 5 gigs, whatever you want. So it can really keep the affordability front of mind when you're thinking of potentially using one of these plans in a different country. And then just to note, you will need to install some kind of eSIM on your phone. That does require additional steps, but if you are tech savvy, you should be able to do that no problem. Even people who aren't tend to be able to do it pretty effectively. And then, like I mentioned before, texting or calling may be limited depending on the location that you're going to. The last option I'm going to mention is in relation to just purchasing a SIM card on arrival, whether that be a physical SIM or an eSIM. So no matter where you're going across the globe, you will likely find there are kiosks for whatever major carriers are in that particular country in the international airports you'll be arriving into. Oftentimes, what they're offering is the same service you would have as a local in that country for a limited amount of time. And it can be through a physical or an eSIM, like I mentioned. Usually, it's significantly less expensive compared to your traditional phone plan if you're choosing to do international roaming abroad. So I would say this is definitely a good option if you're looking at affordability. And then some of the benefits would be that they will have on-site staff to help you, right? So it'll be a traditional sort of experience where you go into one of those mobile carrier companies and get set up with a plan while you're in country. Those staff can help you choose the correct plan and also get it working on your phone too. So if you're a little bit worried about getting an eSIM working on your phone, this may be a good option for you because they can actually help you do that yourself. The one thing to note is local staff There may be language barriers depending on where you're going. So if you don't speak that local language, then you may want to consider, making sure that you have someone who does with you, or just encouraging that worker to use Google Translate with you, whatever works best. But note that that could be a limitation. And then the last thing would be in relation to the amount of time it takes you once you arrive. So like any sort of international trip, oftentimes you're going to be relatively tired. You've gone through customs, you've had to deal with, baggage claim, all these different things. And then you have to go and spend an hour, getting a SIM card for your phone. Some people would not want to do that. So I would just say, if that's you, then look at one of those other eSIM options, or work on getting your international roaming working with your current carrier in whatever country you're coming from. With that, I'll just conclude with a few thoughts. So compared to a decade ago, right, I was studying abroad, and I found that there really weren't that many good options. And in general, it was relatively difficult to make sure that I had communication while, I was out and about. So I did end up purchasing with a local carrier, and had a phone that was just kind of a little flip phone. That worked to an extent, but I didn't really bring it with me ever, right? So I had a separate smartphone that I brought with me and used Wi-Fi on usually. So I think, these options have really increased substantially. And so use one of those for when you're going somewhere, right? It's important to have communication just because of the need to communicate with other people, then also communicate with, emergency services if anything comes up while you're there. It's also important to note, and we mentioned this a little bit before, that you need to understand your unique needs from any sort of international mobile plan that you pick. And then also just making sure that you research before you depart. And this goes for, many different subjects, but particularly here, you want to ensure that whatever company that you pick is going to provide you the service that you need while you're there. And then the last thing I would just mention is that each plan and each company is unique in their own right. And so, they'll have advantages or disadvantages depending on the location you're going to. So just ensure, again, that you're researching that and making sure that matches up with what you need. So that's, in total, what I would say are some of the best options if you're planning on, using some kind of mobile plan abroad. I would highly recommend it, like I said before, so you can access any sort of emergency services if you are, suffering from some kind of medical issue or there's a security incident. Overall, there are more picks than this too, so feel free to reach out and do some research on that too. Thanks so much for watching though. I really appreciate that people are viewing these videos and are finding them useful. If you are interested, feel free to like and subscribe. I'm always happy to hear from you in the comments as well. So thanks so much. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.